Joining us now is Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, and you think this is a good day for America. Let me ask you something. Is $60 billion enough money for Ukraine to push back Russia decisively?
Well, we hope so. It's actually only 0.2% of our gross domestic product. So put in that context, it's not a whole lot of money for us, but it's a very significant step for them because it gives them the more sophisticated weapons they need to hold the Russians at bay. And we're optimistic these people are going to win. I mean, the Russians are trying to take their country, and they have enormous incentive, and it doesn't require any of our personnel. We're not getting any Americans killed. We're helping them defend their independence and also degrade the military of one of our biggest adversaries, the Russians.
Do you think that President Biden was too slow to give Ukraine what it needed initially so that we wouldn't get to this point where they could have, maybe been in a better position by now? Instead of, it feels kind of like they're just losing slowly.
Yeah, much slower than it should have. The president made two big mistakes. Number one was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was not at war. We kept the lid on terrorism there. We shouldn't have withdrawn the troops. When we did, that was like sending a green light to Putin, who is already thinking seriously about moving his troops up against the border. Secondly, we didn't give them sufficient weaponry soon enough. We tended to react too slowly. So the administration did make a number of mistakes, but at least at this point, after a long delay, we've all come together and done what needed to be done to help the Ukrainians. And, this is a huge issue to the whole world.
Yeah.
The Prime Minister of Japan the other day, in an address to the Congress, talked about Ukraine. So it's a big deal for every country in the world that elects its own leadership.
So the vote was 79-18, and you've talked about your concern about an isolationist strain in the Republican Party. It's, that comes up from time to time in our history if you look back. And there are people wondering, and you can understand their reluctance, even though it is such a small part of the GDP, this foreign aid piece, but they're upset that nothing was done on the southern border, and they feel like Americans aren't being well taken care of. Is there anything that the Republicans can do this summer before the election to make them feel better about that?
Boy, I certainly agree with that sentiment. I think our southern border has been an unmitigated disaster for this administration and for our country. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. We ought to be able to fix that border as well as help the democratically elected countries around the world stand up to the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians. We had a negotiation with the administration over trying to get some legislation they would agree to. That fell by the wayside because a lot of my members, including myself, were hoping we could make a better deal with them. And we have to deal with them because they have the White House, they have the Senate. I think we ought to address that as soon as possible.
Okay.
If I were the president, I'd fix this myself and take the heat away.
Do you think that having the TikTok force of the sale of TikTok, not a TikTok ban, people would still be able to do TikTok, do you think that helps you get to the number 79-18?
Well, let me tell you what that was about. That was about national security. And I'm a big defender of the First Amendment and free speech. But when it comes to national security, we were all concerned about the control of TikTok by the Chinese.